You know, all this technology we have today, it really makes it a lot easier to get your ideas out fast. But have you ever thought about that your orchestra libraries could help you or teach you how to orchestrate better? If you're new here or if you want more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. You'll get more videos on how to create music on your DAW and how to get your creativity come out faster and not worry too much about technicalities and plugins all the time. How can an orchestra library teach you how to orchestrate better? You obviously need to have an orchestra library, and later I will show you some libraries you could think of if you don't have one. What's good about it is that it's mixed, pre-recorded, panned in the right way, in such a way that all the instruments are where they should be. You don't need to worry about if I should put the winds here and there. You don't need to worry about the volumes being correctly. They are already correct as they sound in a whole orchestra. There's nothing wrong in changing EQs and volumes, and maybe when you get more good at this, you might want to do that. But as a beginner, do not touch a thing. Just let it sound like it sounds. Because some instruments are basically louder than others, and they're naturally so. If you're going to raise the volume of a small, tiny instrument to be louder than other instruments that are naturally louder, it just sounds weird. A lot of people make that mistake. So you have to look at where is your instrument, how loud is it, and how does it sound with other instruments. I will show you an example to make my point much clearer. So here I have a simple mock-up just to show you what you can do with an orchestra library, or rather how it could teach you to orchestrate better. Now, it would be better to have the whole template with all my instruments, but just to make it easier for me and for you, I have made this short example. So let's start with listening to the strings playing some simple chords. Okay, as you can hear, the strings are not playing that loud. It's quite soft, it's quite simple chords. Also, I haven't panned anything, I haven't mixed anything. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that, and in fact, often in the end result, maybe you do want to mix and add EQs. I'm not against that, but to just leave the library as it is. Because most libraries, except maybe one or two that I know, it's all mixed correctly. All the instruments are sitting in the right position. So it sounds good already. So don't touch the fader volumes. If you need the instrument to be louder, they need to express louder, they need to play louder. You can't magically raise the volume of an instrument like you can do in a DAW. So let's try one of my favorite instruments, bassoon, and add that as a melody on top of the strings. As you can hear, the bassoon is not very loud and it almost disappears now and then. It's partially because it's a lower instrument, it plays lower down, so it's competing a little bit with the strings. It's not a very loud instrument. So what could you do here? Well, if you feel like it's not loud enough, you couldn't just tell the bassoon player to, raise its volume. It doesn't work that way. It might seem strange to you, but normally in a DAW, we could just sort of raise the volume. But that's not really a good idea. It starts to sound unnatural. What the bassoon player has to do is to play louder. And that might work, but you have to ask yourself, is that what I want? Because when an instrument plays louder, it changes the energy and the texture. And if you want it to be soft and mellow, you can't just have the bassoon player like blow its brains out, sort of, just to sound louder. And if you really want the bassoon, I think it works in this case, but if you want it to be louder, and be heard more, then you have to change the orchestration. Maybe have less bassy instrument, maybe play more in the upper register of the strings so they don't compete so much with the frequencies of the bassoon. Another thing that is quite easy is to add, for example, another voice to it, because this is one player, and that's, just one person competing with all these string players that are quite a few. Let's see, the oboe is basically a smaller bassoon, or you could say that the bassoon is a smaller oboe. They're just in different register, but they're very similar instruments in texture. So if we add that, I'm thinking I should have made a more happy melody so we don't sit here and become sad. Anyway, as you can hear, it's much easier to hear the melody. And it's not just that the oboe is playing louder, because it isn't. It's higher up in the register, so it's easier to hear. You have to think of instruments sort of like an EQ. The higher frequencies are easier to pick up. And you can say, well, why not just have the oboe by itself? Yeah, you could do that. It would sound perfectly fine. That's no problem with that. But the bassoon adds depth to it. It's thicker. So here you see the options, like the Orchestral Libraries teaching you, well, by trying different textures, different combinations of instruments, you get different sounds. Yeah. Flute is also an excellent example. Now they all work, but they're not super, super, super loud. So another thing you could do is just add them all in. The whole wind is playing together. You hear it's a lot louder, and it's not that anyone is playing louder, it is that they're all together are creating this bigger, fatter sound. So don't be afraid to try that out. Like maybe I just want the flute and oboe. Maybe that's kind of nice. That's kind of loud because they have a little different textures. They're playing the same register, but they could be an octave apart. So don't be afraid to mix and try different wind instrument. And they don't have to do harmony. They can play the same note. In fact, that's quite common. Okay, so that is strings and winds. Now let's try the same chords but with some brass instead. I'm just gonna have some French horn. I have a tuba underneath, and I'm gonna add a choir. Let's throw in the kitchen sink and see how that feels like. As you can hear, the volume is actually almost the same, but brass instruments are just having a very different texture. And they are louder in themselves as well, but you can hear they're quite subdued, in fact. But horns are loud. Let's put in the bassoon again and see if we can hear it. Yeah, since you know the melody, because we heard it now 3 billion times, you kind of can pick it out, but you also notice that it's not easy to hear, and it would not be a good choice now to have the bassoon trying to compete with the brass. It just doesn't work at all. We could try the flute, see if that works. Again, you can hear it, but it's too low. You just don't really pick it up. Maybe if we had all the winds, you could hear it better. I think so, but still, it wouldn't be a good choice. Now you hear it, but you get the sensation that it's not that subtle melody anymore. They're blowing. It feels like they're giving too much energy, and maybe that's something you want later on. You see, you can do a lot of variation here. Well, let's just try the solo trumpet. It's one player on top of the horns and see how that works. As you can see, no problem. Even if you put all the instruments here, you would still hear the trumpet really well. So I hope you can see how important this is. And actually, by paying attention, your library will tell you what works. You will see what combinations work well together. This instrument might be fantastic with those instruments, but with those instruments, you can't hear it at all. So already start to think about the orchestra being sort of an EQ by itself, not by EQing things, by using their instrument. Okay. Later on, obviously, when you get good at this, there's nothing wrong with changing things. With new hybrid music, you can create strange music that maybe a tiny oboe is still louder than everybody. Maybe there's a case of that. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying don't start that way. Don't worry about mixing. Don't worry about gain staging. Don't worry about setting your faders right or panning it right. Just let your orchestra library do the work for you. Make that song sound good as it is, and then later you could maybe mix it if necessary. So what are some good libraries you could think of if you don't have one? Well, I'm not saying that any of these libraries are better or worse. I'm just saying these are some libraries you could think of that are complete orchestras. I also wanted to include a little bonus tip for you. If you haven't already downloaded the Sign player from Orchestra Tools, do that because you do actually get a free library with it. Now, it's not the greatest library in the world, but it's actually pretty good. And it has all the sections that you can easily play out as a base for your orchestrations. And you can also listen to those chords and see what is that library doing, and in that way actually learning quite a bit what works together. So it's completely free. I highly recommend to download it and check it out. So that's it for this time. I hope you find this really useful. I did myself when I found out when I started to think this way, I could spend more time on composing and worrying less about mixing. Because in a way, you are already mixing when you're creating your song. So if you want to see more videos like this, then obviously hit that subscribe button and the bell icon as well. And if you like it, maybe let me know by giving me a like. Or perhaps you can tell me in the comments the way you go about these things. Until next time, this is Sam signing out. Take care.